Okay, can we now start the next session? I've been joined here by two people, Orla O'Connor, who's from the National Women's Council of Ireland, and Anthony Nabil Keedi, who's from ABAD, which is a resource centre for gender equality in the Lebanon, and it is a partner for Oxfam Ireland and for various Irish Aid supported activities. I'm going to start by asking Anthony to address us, then Orla will address us, and afterwards we'll open up to the floor. Thank you. Anthony.
Thank you. Hello. I'd like to thank you all so much for having me with you today, and it's a real honor to kick off the 16 days with all of you and to hear your president speak. We don't have a president, so hearing any president speak is quite impressive for a Lebanese person. One of the questions that I hear most is, why do we need to engage men? At first, this seems like a fairly good question. For the longest time, women and women's organizations have bonded together and have given birth to feminism, women's empowerment, have fought injustice completely on their own. When they were an unheard voice, they unified, all of them raised their voices together. And if we look in the past 100 years only of how much progress has been made by women on women's rights, it's a fair question. Why do we engage men? I think the best analogy that I could probably give for that is, if we think about a disease, and we think about the disease of gender-based violence and structural violences, working on women's empowerment is an immunity towards that virus. It's an immunity towards that disease. And with time, we've built up the capacities of women to be able to fight off that disease, so hopefully it happens less. But we haven't necessarily tried to find the cure. The cure would be addressing the disease itself. Now, the disease itself is not men, it's violence. And the host is in men by terms of how we socialize men and how we socialize women. So we need to engage men in our work, because if we do not, we'll be continually trying to have women readjust themselves to however this virus or patriarchy or violence displays itself in our communities, whether that be in the home or whether women still not having full and equal participation in public life, whether that be in economy or in our politics. So then we have to ask the question, why are men violent? Why is violence almost gearing only towards men as a population? And this is where we talk more about how we socialize men and women differently. So again, the women's empowerment movement has seen how women were put into a very narrow box. And that very narrow box was, your caretakers, your mothers, you should silently accept the things that come your way for the good of the family, you should be supportive, etc. You're not leaders, you're not dominant, you don't have any original things to say in order to change the way we look at society. And strong women, again, everywhere historically stood up and said, that is absolutely not true. We are all types of beautiful, and we want to display ourselves as all types of beautiful. The same process hasn't necessarily been done for men, and we need to start realizing that we put men in the same narrow box, but with different symptoms. We tell men, you're the leader, you shouldn't be emotional. There's no room for sensitivity. You need to be dominant. Dominant, whether that means economically dominant, socially dominant, physically dominant, you need to be dominant. You need to be the head, you need to be the alpha male. This is how we've taught men to value themselves. This is how society gives value to men, universally speaking. Examples of this, especially when it comes to violence, when I was a young child, I was more accustomed to holding a gun in my hand, a toy gun, than a pencil, and before I knew how to write my name, a gun didn't feel foreign to me. On the same note, my sister got toy babies. She got toy Barbies. And before she could write her name, she felt very accustomed to holding a baby. When we want to take an exaggerated look at this, we think about a conflict situation, a conflict setting. All of a sudden, the toys are not toys anymore. We notice there are boy soldiers who are holding real guns, and there are child mothers who are holding real babies. But this is our socialization. This is how we are taught who to be, what to value in ourselves, what to practice. In a sense, when we socialize men towards dominance, towards violence, to become accustomed and for it to be normal to hold a weapon, to idealize other men who have made changes in the world, good or bad depending on your perspective, through aggression, through violence, through war, etc. When our heroes are those heroes, what do we truly expect of men? How can we not see that anyone socialized in this manner would see violence not only as normal but as a necessity sometimes for change, for discipline, for obedience, for structure? We need to engage men because we need to do the same work that has been done for women over the years and break them out of that shell. The same way women were being limited in what they could possibly be, men are being limited in what we could possibly be. We are much more than just the breadwinners. We are much more than just providers. We can be caretakers. We can be supporters. We can be the allies of the strong women who will come up and who will lead us at times where we need to be led. And it's only in this spirit and that vision that gender equality can truly exist. Otherwise, if we're simply talking to women, about women, then we will consistently be trying to help women break out of a patriarchal system where men are on top, and men aren't even aware of what change we're actually asking for. And we'll continue to see violence in all of its forms continue to be something that we deal with. So when we want to talk about what type of change is necessary, because it's not just sufficient to say, all right, we'll engage men. What does that mean? That means that when we talk to men in our societies, whether that be in a developed society or in a society that's plagued by conflict like the culture that I come from and the region that we're surrounded in part of it's transformative change and true transformative change. Sometimes that word gets used rather vaguely, and I want to clarify transformative in the nature that we really need men to be able to see how they have been raised to think some of these things are rather normal. Male privilege is very real. It's like any other privilege that we've addressed and we've spoken about in the past. But it takes a great amount of effort and analysis for a privileged community to be able to see when they're privileged and to be able to truly listen when another group tells them this happened, that's a discriminatory action, and that comes from male privilege. Men are not accustomed to this. In fact, as a defense to much of the work that has been done on women's empowerment, a lot of the words that are beautiful, such as women's empowerment, have come along with negative connotations for men, where we don't even listen anymore. That's the type of transformative change we need. We need to bring men into the room. We need to have them truly analyze and think back about how they were personally raised. What were you given to play with when you were a child? What lessons were you taught? How many times did you hear head of the household? What about women? When from simple interactions to how you interact on a daily level, to how many women we have in our political system, to how many years women had to fight for the right to vote, when nations were born from the simple concept of not allowing them to represent themselves. However, women, as citizens within those nations, were still not given the right to represent themselves. And that takes some time. So the transformative change that we're talking about is to be able to work very in depth with men, to be able to let them know that this is a process of how they were raised, but the process of change can be equally as powerful. The same way that we were socialized towards violence, we can learn that there are a million different ways beyond violence that we can help change the world. The same way we were taught to lead, we can learn that it is as important, sometimes if not more important, to step back and to allow others to lead, and not just other men, to allow women to lead, to listen to their needs. Because if we're not all on the same page, there's no possible way that we can all move in the same direction. There's no way that development or peace is possible. When we talk about engaging men and the processes that are needed, I know yesterday I was lucky enough to sit with a consortium, and we had a wonderful day where we talked a lot of in depth about a lot of these issues. It does need time. The one thing that I would warn about when we're doing work with men and boys is this cannot be seen as a quick fix. Proper change takes time, and you have to allow the individual and the individuals not only the process of thinking back about their lives, about what they see around them, about the violence that they witness, that they might have stayed silent about if they did not have a hand in it directly. That many men feel that although I'm not abusive, that I don't necessarily feel the need to speak out. That is also something we need to give them that sense of agency for. No, it is exactly the reason why you need to speak out. Because as long as we stay silent about this, we allow these actions to continue. Whether that be, again, about GBV in its more simpler turn, or about structural violences that we see. Women earning equal pay, women's right to education. We need to take time with this. If we really want to create male champions, then our response needs to be consistent, it needs to be passionate, and it needs to allow those men the time and the guidance to change. I'm not going to take too much more of your time. I'm really actually excited for the question and answer part. But in conclusion, I would say that there are three very important components, not very important, essential components when you're talking about working on masculinities or engaging men. The first one is empathy. So this is to say that to truly understand the problem, it's always best to try to put yourself in the perspective of that person. So the same way we hope that men would put themselves in the position of women to understand the different violence against women, we must also make the effort to put ourselves in the positions of men, and how that would be when you're raised with all of these notions of manhood and these notions of masculinity, that it's not a far stretch to see that men turn out this way. We all have to take a part of that responsibility as a society, as a global society, and as our individual societies, that we raise men to think that they are entitled to this privilege. And that we also have to raise men to understand that when they act out on that privilege, that's everyone's issue. And we really need to work with them to help them see. You can't work on a problem if you don't acknowledge it first. So we have to help men to see the problem, to see about the way they were raised and how much that works negatively against themselves. It is not a healthy human quality to not be emotionally expressive, or to have the pressure to have all the answers, or to feel that violence is an acceptable resolution towards conflict. That comes with many consequences that are too difficult to get rid of later on, the least among them more violence. Violence beget violence is something that we've heard over and over and over to the point where it's become cliche. But if you stop and you think about that, how many times has male violence stopped there? How many times has it not escalated? How many times has that not ruptured the dynamic of a loving relationship beyond repair? So we need to have empathy. We need to allow men to be able to see these things while trying to be as accepting and non-accusatory as possible. With that said, that comes to the second element, and that's responsibility. To be able to understand someone else does not mean that all of a sudden everything is excused. I can understand how, by the way I was raised, I might have been violent in my history. It doesn't mean that that's okay. I might understand that someone who comes from a background where they are uneducated might end up with certain behaviors that are contrary to what we would like. Again, it doesn't mean, oh, well, then that's fine. We need to put men in the position where they are individually responsible for every one of their actions. An act of violence is still an act of violence, and there's a large sense of agency from the person to commit that violence. And by that same token, we will do our best to raise their awareness about that, to challenge their concepts of manhood, to see themselves that they can be men. We need to stop defining men in the same way. They can be men who are not violent. They can be men that are peaceful. They can be men that are supportive. But to do that, they need to own up to their actions. To do that, they need to take responsibility for anything they've done in the past and any action that they take in the future. So that needs to be critical when we're talking about our work on engaging men, empathy and responsibility. The third one, and I can't stress this one enough, is the focus on the needs of women. We cannot begin such work because we heard on the field that women were saying, we understand, we wish you would talk to our husbands, our sons, our brothers, and then not to realize that at the end of the day, to see if our program was successful, to see if our initiative was successful, to see if we're actually stopping the personal gender-based violence and the structural violence and discrimination that women feel every day, we need to go back to the women and we need to ask them about that. That's our barometer. We need to continually go back and say, what's happening? How do you think that we can work with men to work on these issues that we've already set out, that women have been working on for at least a century? So anytime we do not make women and women's needs central to our work on masculinities, we've already started off on the wrong foot. And I think in doing that, it's essential, and I'm actually so happy that we're having this conversation among the Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, because I can't think of better hands for this responsibility to be placed in. I think it always needs to be placed in such a perfect venue. We, again, yesterday's conversations when I was able to sit with the consortium was absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's only with such leadership that I would personally have the confidence that such work would be done. Because the question now is not if we should engage men. The better question now is how are we going to engage men? And that means hopefully in a transformative manner with empathy and responsibility and focused on women's needs, and how that relates back to gender-based violence and discrimination against women. Thank you very much.
Thank you.